Welcome back to Neutral Deductions, where we talk about all things men's gymnastics. USA Gymnastics has named the national team, the World Championships team, and the Pan American Games team, and we're going to talk about if they made the right decision, so stay tuned. Today we're mainly going to focus on day 2 of competition plus the team selection. So if you want an in-depth video of everything that happened in night 1, I'll link it down below in the comments. So coming into night 2, Asher Hong was leading, followed by Yul Moldauer and Fred Richard, but the three of them were only separated by 0.2 of a point, and we knew that we were going to be in for a show. So day 2 started, the Stanford contingent was on high bar, and many of the athletes were in contention for a spot on the national team. So Koi Young and Asher Hong really did their job. They didn't fall off. They don't have a lot of difficulty, and this isn't an event that they will necessarily be used on for a World Championships team, let's say, but they did well. They both scored within the 13, and they were able to move on. Riley Luce did a Lucan skill, which is a Tkachev with a full twist over the bar, and it got lots of oohs and ahs from the crowd. It's really a show-stopping piece. And then Colt Walker was able to improve his high bar routine from night 1 by over half a point with a clean routine, but it was actually Brandon Briones who took the highest score of the rotation with a 13.812. Yul Moldauer started his day on still rings, and he had said in an interview after day 1 that starting on P-bars can be a little bit difficult because you can be shaky and it makes it hard to perform your skills. And honestly, starting on still rings is no different because you need to be able to control the rings because each swing is a deduction. But he was able to start day 2 strong, and what we thought would be indicative of a strong performance and a bid for a second all-around title. Steven Edorosik finally did not have to wait 100 years to perform his pommel horse routine, and it showed. His routine was better than night 1, meaning he actually hit 2 for 2 routines, which would be strong for him in wanting to compete for a spot in either the Pan American or the World Championships team. Fred Richard started off his night performing a drag burlesque for the first time on vault. It was slightly under-rotated and he did have to have a big step to the side, but the 0.4 increase in difficulty from night 1 did actually result in a 3.5 increase in his score, and this would also be really important for him because the US does need to increase their vault difficulty, so having multiple people who can compete a 5-6 difficulty plus start value on vault is going to be really important in their bid for a bronze medal at the World Championships this year. So following the 7th rotation, Yul took over the lead of the all-around, followed by Fred Richard, Asher Hong, Paul Judah, and Koi Young. Not much happened in the 8th rotation or the 9th rotation, to be honest, but there were a few routines that I do want to highlight. So the best routine of the 8th rotation for me was Cameron Bach's parallel bar routine. His routine was so well executed, and he earned a 14.95, which was one of the highest scores of the night. In the 9th rotation, Koi was magnificent on pommel horse, and this was quite a key routine for him. His flare work was really well extended, and even though he ended up losing a little bit of form in the end, he ended up with a 14.922. And a score like that could challenge for a spot in the pommel horse final at the World Championships. Of course, there was some bonus added in, but he'll be one to watch. Michigan was magnificent on high bar. They ended up with actually 4 of the top 6 routines on high bar at the end of the competition. Fred Richard, of course, had the most difficulty with his Cassina and his Coleman, and he nearly stuck his dismount. Paul Judah definitely improved his score from day 1 because he didn't fall in his straddle Tkachev, and he ended up getting a 14.1, and this was a really key routine for him to hit. He is excellent on high bar, and so had he fallen on the second day of competition, it really would have affected his bid for the World Championships team. So following 9 rotations, which was 3/4 of the way through the 2 days of competition, the all-around standings were Yul Moldauer in first place, Fred Richard in second, Koi Young, Asher Hong, and then Paul Judah. Rotation 10 is where things actually got really, really interesting. So Paul hit a near perfect floor routine. Shane redeemed his miss on parallels from day 1 with a 14.85. Curran Phillips went to parallel bars, and he was not really as clean as he needed to be, and with only competing 3 events, there really is no room for mistakes. His 14.744, while still a good score, it really was not an event final score that he needed to show to secure a spot for the World Championships team. I have to say the shock for me of the rotation was Yul Moldauer. So high bar has not been a routine or an event that is really strong for him, but he has put in a lot of work, and that showed on night 1. But on night 2, he was incredibly late on his Takimoto full, which he almost certainly did not receive credit for. And coming in late for the Tak full, it really affected the rest of his routine, which means he didn't get a proper tap for the Coleman, which is the full twisting double back over the high bar, and he ended up falling pretty hard. He did remount and made it through the routine, but he only ended up with 11.2, and this really took him out of the running for the all-around title. So following the 10th rotation, Fred Richard was able to take over the top spot. Heading into the penultimate rotation, things really didn't improve for Moldauer. He had a short landing on his double front half out, which he almost always sticks. In his 5th pass, he had a fall, which meant he was even further down the standings. So a miss on high bar was not as critical for his bid for Worlds, but a miss on floor was. The 2017 bronze medalist desperately needed a redemption routine and instead was unable to deliver. The 11th rotation was also really unkind to frontrunner Fred Richard. He had 2 falls on pommel horse, which effectively also ended his bid for the national championship title. So it was really down to Asher Hung, and Asher hit a massive Risei Guang for a 15.105, and that sent him to the top of the all-around standings before the final rotation. So here we are in the final rotation. Moldauer gets up on pommel horse. He hits a pretty clean routine, although he did have to muscle up the dismount. Fred Richard also did about as well as he could on still rings, but it was really Asher Hong who went to one of his strongest events, which is parallel bars, and he capped off his routine with a stuck landing, and at that point we pretty much all knew that he had sealed his bid for the all-around national championship title. Interestingly, though, it was Hong's teammate that ended up making what I think was an even bigger statement in that rotation. So Colt Walker was on the World Championships team last year. He has been struggling through injuries. We weren't sure if he was going to end up competing the all-around, and he ended up going incredibly cleanly through his parallel bar routine for a huge 15.250. And interestingly, Colt Walker, with that routine, actually won the all-around title had the bonus system not been in place. So using regular FIG scoring, he went over 85 and would have otherwise won. So at this point in the competition, I'm sitting next to Spencer from the balance beam situation, and he's, of course, crunching numbers and trying to look at what is going to be the highest scoring team. And a member from the USA staff came over and started asking us who did we think was going to be on the team. And both Spencer and I thought that they were going to end up taking the top 6 all around, but we were unsure if Yule or Colt would be the alternate at this time. And as it turns out, that's exactly what the senior selection committee decided to do. So the final all around standings with bonus were 1 Asher Hong, 2 Koi Young, 3 Fred Richard, 4 Colt Walker, 5 Yule Moldauer, and 6 Paul Judah. And then Donnell Wittenberg came in 7th and Shane Wiskus in 8th. So at the end of the event, they announced the automatic qualifiers to the senior national and senior development teams. So the automatic qualifiers included top 5 in the all-around, which was Asher, Fred, Koi, Colt, and Yule. And then they did the top 5 by the 10-point system, not already named, to the national team. So the top 5 in the point system was Paul Judah, Donnell Wittenberg, Kern Phillips, Taylor Burkhart, and Dallas Hale. And I believe that Dallas Hale is the first Gym Act gymnast to ever make it to the national team, so that was incredibly exciting. So for those of you a little bit unfamiliar with college gymnastics, there's NCAA, there's 15 teams currently competing in the NCAA, and then there are very, very competitive club teams, which comprise the Gym Act system. So Dallas Hale is part of the Texas Armadillos, but he actually trains at Cypress under Tom Meadows. So that was really a stellar moment for him. Next came the senior development team, and to automatically qualify, athletes needed to be age 18 to 20. So if you saw an asterisk by their name during the competition, that's what it meant. It meant that they were eligible for placement on the senior development team. So Asher and Fred were eligible via age and D-score for one of the spots on the senior development team, but as they had already qualified to the senior national team, this left 10 athletes who were age eligible for one of the 5 available spots on the senior development team. For the past couple of years, the men's program committee and the senior selection committee have set aside 5 full spots for the senior development team, and athletes needed to be aged 18 to 20 and have a 32 D-score. And the committee has been pretty lax in this requirement to give athletes who are younger an opportunity to develop. However, in the June 2023 meeting minutes, the committee voted unanimously to more strictly enforce the 32D score, and they agreed to have a minimum of 2 athletes on the senior development team, regardless of if they met the D score benchmark. But otherwise, should there not be 5 athletes who met the 32D score requirement, those spots could be reallocated back to the senior national team. So as it turns out, there was only one athlete who met that benchmark, and that was Josh Carnes on day 1. He had a 32.5 D score. No other athlete met that benchmark, and so the second spot went to Landon Blix, and he had the second highest scoring D score among age-eligible athletes with a 31. So that was all that they showed during the actual event, and then later the senior selection committee went back and they decided via petition and discretionary selections who else would comprise the senior national team. And as it turns out, they did decide to allocate all of the rest of the spots to the senior national team. So there are only a total of 2 athletes on the senior development team. So the roster that was released later included Jeremy Bischoff from Stanford, Cameron Bach from Michigan, Brandon Briones from Stanford, Alex Diab from Evo, Riley Luce from Stanford, Brody Malone from Evo, Steven Nedorostik from Evo, Vahi Petrosian, and Shane Wiskus. So this is where things start to get a little bit interesting. It looks like they ended up taking the next 4 in the all-around, which would have been Jeremy, Cam, Riley, and Shane. And then after removing those athletes from the 10-point system, Steven Nedorostik was the next highest point scorer, so all good up until this point. Then we get to Alex Diab, and I find this selection a little bit confusing for a couple of reasons. The first is that Alex was chosen over an athlete that was ranked higher than him in the points total. Specifically, it's confusing why the selection committee chose him over Crew Bold. So Crew competed for routines and was higher in the points total and had a higher ranking in one event. So Colt was ranked 2nd on high bar, and Alex was ranked 3rd on still rings. Again, Crew had a higher point total and a higher ranking. Alex had a lower point total and a lower ranking. So like for like, in my opinion, Crew Bold actually should have gotten the nod for the senior national team. It should be stated that Alex Diab was struggling with injuries, and that prevented him from competing on floor and on vault, and so his coaches submitted a petition on his behalf. But here's the problem. At Winter Cup earlier this year, Diab was able to compete all 3 events, and he still didn't make the national team that time. And it very much feels like the selection committee is prioritizing potential over what was actually shown. And this is the senior selection committee and the NPC have had a history of doing this, of allowing people to petition when they wouldn't necessarily have made national team otherwise. And they seem to really like that this athlete has the potential. And it's not that Alex is a bad athlete. He absolutely isn't. He's world class on still rings. And it's not that he's not national team caliber. He absolutely is. But in my opinion, there was a better choice in this instance to be made. The second decision that made people really question what was going on was the addition of Vahi Petrosian, and I want to explain why he was chosen for the senior national team. So Vahi was 24th in the all-around, and certainly by performance alone in a normal year would not ever have been in consideration for the senior national team. However, in 2021, when Vahe was a junior athlete, he won the 2021 Pan American Games all-around title. And because of his result, he earned a nominative spot to the 2023 Pan American Games, meaning that spot belongs to him and only him. So if the senior selection committee had not chosen to put him on national team, he would have lost the opportunity to compete in Chile later this year, and then the U.S. would have also lost a spot for the Pan American Games. So it's a super weird situation, but I certainly understand why the senior selection committee went in this direction. The final spot for senior national team was awarded via injury petition, and this was for world champion Brody Malone. And Brody was injured earlier this year in Germany while competing on high bar, and he's working very hard in the gym right now, but he's just not able to compete. And some people have asked, well, why would you add an athlete who is injured? And I sort of understand that rhetoric, especially because in the men's program in past years has added people who have been injured time after time after time, but then have also excluded people based on injury and how long it takes them to come back. But in this case for Brody, he has a set competition date. He's planning on competing at the McCulloch Cup down in Sarasota, Florida in February. He had doctors be able to testify to when he should be able to compete, and he was injured on a national team assignment. And had he not been injured, he really should have been considered the best gymnast in the U.S. at this time. So I think putting him on the national team makes a lot of sense. You don't want to punish people for getting injured on national team assignments. So to summarize, all of these spots I believe belong on national team. I think there's an argument to be made for Krewbold over Alex Diab, and I'm waiting to see what the committee minutes say for why they did make that selection. And then Petrosian is also a little bit of controversy, but I certainly understand why they allowed him a spot on the senior national team this year. Okay, so now let's get into the world's team selection. As I mentioned earlier, Spencer and I felt pretty certain that they were going to go with top 6 in the all-around. Because Steven Nedorosik hit both days, I thought that he would probably be considered for a spot, but ultimately left off. The documentation was pretty clear that they were going to prioritize all-arounders, and there wasn't a huge scoring difference between a team with Steve on it and a team without him on it. The only thing I was a little bit unsure of was whether or not they were going to have Yule be the alternate or Colt be the alternate. It ends up that they did end up making Colt the alternate, which I really feel for Colt because he did end up having the highest score in the all-around using FIG scoring, which is what's going to be used at the World Championships, and it really feels wrong that the should have been national all-around champion would be left off of a Worlds team. But that being said, the team selected did have a slightly higher score based on the 2 days of competition, according to Spencer's calculation. So I don't really feel like there was any controversy with this team that was selected, but let me know what you think in the comments. Because Colt was the alternate for the World Championships, he also had first right of refusal for a spot at the Pan American Games. It does seem like he ended up accepting that spot, and then joining him would be Cameron Bach, Steven Nedorosik, Donnell Wittenberg, and Shane Wiskus. And the non-traveling alternates are Riley Luce and Curran Phillips. And then Vahe Petrosian will be the individual qualifier. I was a little bit surprised that Curran was not named to this team, but again, I don't think it's a huge controversy because he had a miss on high bar day 1 and he had a semi-miss on parallel bars day 2, and I think for a gymnast who's going to compete 3 events, you really do have to show up and hit. There is not as much room for error. I hope you enjoyed our coverage of the 2023 Xfinity U.S. National Gymnastics Championships and all of the team selections. We will be releasing more videos soon in the lead up to the World Championships. As always, I would like to take a moment and ask you to subscribe here on YouTube and like this video. It really does help. You can also subscribe to my website, neutraldeductions.com, and get free weekly updates in your email on everything that's happening in men's gymnastics. I'll see you next time.